Chapter 60. 4th Year, October. Once it became abundantly clear that Lily would not be snogging James before the end of September, he demanded that they extend the bet to last the entirety of the year, which Sirius still thought was far too optimistic of a timeline. Still, he agreed, confident in his ability to win and seeing no need to rush the ordeal. In fact, he was so confident that he suggested they double the amount of galleons at stake, which made Peter look as if he might be sick, and Remus tut disapprovingly. But James agreed, unwaveringly certain that he would be able to win Evans over if only given enough time. It wasn't that Sirius needed to extend the bet. He could have gotten a snog in September, if he'd wanted to, and he repeatedly assured James of this fact. Effie Scunthorpe was still bothering Remus, and he'd received notes expressing interest from not one, but 2 other girls. By any measure, he was well ahead of the other marauders. The problem was that a man had to have standards. Sirius wasn't about to go snogging the first bird who batted her eyelashes at him, and besides, most of the girls batting their lashes at him were irritating. He struggled to pin down what, exactly, it was about them that bothered him. Perhaps the simpering, or the all-too-obvious giggling, or the over-the-top blushing. The attention was flattering, but Sirius was quickly learning that once the girls decided they fancied you, they began to act very stupid. It wouldn't have been fun to kiss them. There wasn't any challenge to it. Still, he was never one to turn down attention, and it was quite nice to know that his dashing good looks were being appreciated about the castle. So, September dipped into October, which proved to be unseasonably warm. The marauders spent most of their time outside on the grounds, where the trees were slowly shaking themselves into their fall foliage, and the sky was cornflower blue. They tromped about the edges of the forbidden forest, snacking on honeydukes halls in the courtyard, and lounged next to the lake, where Sirius tried and quickly gave up on trying to teach Remus how to skip stones. The month began and ended with a full moon, which was incredibly disappointing, as it meant Remus would miss out on the Halloween feast and any celebrations planned for that evening. Still, he was a good sport about it, not complaining once. Sirius wished, fervently, that he'd be able to make more progress with their animagi efforts, but though they had managed to collect all the ingredients they'd need over the summer, they hadn't actually been able to begin brewing the potion. On the weekends, they spent the bulk of their time on the Quidditch pitch, either practicing, James, or watching from the stands, everyone else. Peter was often pulled in as a standing keeper, which made him very self-conscious and required a lot of cheering from the sidelines to ensure he didn't become too much of a nervous wreck. Unfortunately, without Peter to discuss Quidditch, Sirius often found himself with little to do in the stands. Remus didn't make for great company. He always had his nose glued to the pages of a book. Sometimes Mary and Lily would tag along to watch Marlene practice, but they only seemed to be interested in talking to Remus, which left Sirius pouting and feeling unassuredly left out. He was forced to keep himself busy, pacing the stands, challenging James to broom races, or scribbling on parchment, sometimes his homework, but more often possibilities or tactics that the Gryffindor team could try for their first game, scheduled for November. "We've got to thrash Slytherin this year," he insisted. "Got to show 'em." Slytherin had won the Quidditch Cup the year before, which infuriated Sirius to no end. Both Narcissa and Regulus got to lord it over him, and it was only made worse by the fact he hadn't been able to make the Gryffindor team. Narcissa had graduated, but Reg replaced her as Seeker, and Sirius was counting on James to humble his haughty little brother this year. "You need to lean into your broom more when you take a swing," he told Marlene when she came down to sit for a rest. She shot him an irritated look, hair sweat-dampened and stuck to her forehead, cheeks red. "I hit the bludgers 9 times out of 10, she snapped, trying to catch her breath. 10 times in my best games. Even Mulciper can't manage that." "I don't try to be better than the competition," Sirius admonished, repeating one of James's favourite phrases. "You've only got yourself to beat. Look, Black, if you think you can do it better, we're trying out for beaters on Tuesday." Sirius flushed, looking away. "Nah," he kept his voice casual. "You beat me, fair and square." 2 years ago? He didn't reply, feeling ornately embarrassed, After a moment, James called for Marlene, and she staggered to her feet and trotted back to the pitch. Sirius leaned forward on the barrier, trying to concentrate on practice, but Marlene's words replayed themselves incessantly in his mind. He knew they were trying out for beaters on Tuesday. James had already told him about it, trying to convince him to give it a go, but he had already refused. It would be too pathetic, trying out again when he'd already been turned down. Too desperate. People would know how much he wanted it, and he would have to change his name and go into hiding. Maybe see if his parents still had that Durmstrang paper tucked away somewhere, if he failed to make the second time. Better not to consider it. Unfortunately, Remus seemed to think otherwise. There are 2 beaters on a Quidditch team, you know. Sirius didn't bother to turn, keeping his eyes on the practice. Oh, bloody hell, Moony, he deadpanned. 4 years and you finally learnt something about the game. Remus just tutted under his breath, reminding Sirius strangely of Madame Pomfrey. You know what your problem is? Oh, do tell. You're proud. Sirius laughed. And you're not? Maybe. But I'd be a shit beater, wouldn't I? Sirius didn't know what to say to that. When he didn't respond, Remus heaved a sigh and shut his book, shoving it back into his bag. Look, you're going to hate yourself later if you don't have another crack at it. You're just going to sit here cheering James on for another 3 more years. He stood up. I'm freezing. Off to the library. See you at dinner? Yeah. See you, Moony. Alone in the stands, Sirius reflected on Remus's words. You're going to hate yourself later if you don't have another crack at it. The problem was that Remus was right. He was right, he knew he was right, he was always right, and Sirius knew that he knew he was right. The problem was that he had this way of boiling everything down to its very essence and just stating the facts, like ripping off a plaster, with no sympathy. James would cajole and prod and plead and offer reassurances, but he would never simply tell Sirius that he was being an arse and making himself miserable just because he was too proud for his own good. Sirius sighed and ran a hand through his hair. He wished that Moony wasn't so infuriatingly smart. That Tuesday, he brought his broom to the Gryffindor trials. James looked elated, which only made Sirius's stomach twist into nerves. He could imagine exactly how disappointed his friends would be if he didn't make the team. He could picture vividly how James would try and mask his disappointment. Sirius decided, then and there, that if he failed the trials a second time, he would throw himself into the lake for the giant squid, rather than spend the next 2 months hearing James insist that he was perfectly okay. He didn't have to make the team. There's always next year. Unfortunately for the giant squid, Sirius was on top form. He mashed every bludger that came in, outflying all of the other Gryffindor Quidditch team hopefuls, and distinguishing himself as the clear choice. 2 hours after walking out to the pitch, he was leaving as Gryffindor's new beater. Sirius was thrilled, buzzing with adrenaline, revelling in his newfound glory, which lasted for just under 24 hours, until he was informed about their practice schedule. "Wakey, wakey," James chanted cheerfully, exiting the bathroom with his hair lying flat on his head, only because it was soaked through. Sirius groaned loudly as the curtains to his bed were yanked open. It was a week after the trials, and Sirius was seriously considering murdering James Potter. The boy insisted on getting up at the crack of dawn and rousing everybody else in the room, forcing them to undertake a cruel and unusual punishment of early morning Quidditch drills. "Piss off, Potter," he grumbled, shoving his head under his pillow to block out the infuriating light. "You wanted to be on the team, Sirius, me old chum. Come on, up you get. Levi corpus." All the breath was yanked from his lungs, and Sirius was flung abruptly upwards, yanked like a puppet on a string. He found himself blinking the sleep from his eyes as he hung, upside down, mid-air. James was laughing hysterically across the room, looking absolutely delighted. "I can't believe he worked. I've been trying to do that since Christmas. Oh, let me down, you wanker. Be nice. Let me down. Finite." Sirius crumpled immediately onto the floor in a heap, thudding heavily against the wooden panelling. He leapt to his feet, undeterred by his throbbing arm, which was most certainly besprouting a bruise from where he had fallen onto it. "Bloody hell!" he shouted, unable to stop himself grinning, and suddenly completely awake. "That was amazing! Now let me do it to you. Okay. They spent an excellent 10 minutes levitating each other before Remus began to get grumpy, clearing his throat and glancing meaningfully at the door until they all got the hint and agreed to go down for breakfast. Once they were safely seated at the table, Sirius resumed his quest on trying to talk Potter out of his Quidditch madness. "Just one day off a week, Potter, I'm begging you," he moaned, struggling to keep his eyes open. "You're the one who wants to destroy Slytherin," James replied, without a trace of sympathy, humming jovially to himself as he put some butter on his toast. He slid the plate across the table, a peace offering. Sirius shut his eyes petulantly, looking away. James sighed. "Not just for you, either. The whole school wants to see them beaten. Think of it as doing your bit for the war effort." "I thought you were doing your bit by hexing them in the corridors," Remus said helpfully. "Exactly," Sirius grunted, doing his best to nap with his head propped up on his hands. "And that can be done at a reasonable hour." "Well, this is the only time we can fit practices in," James said, sounding as if he was beginning to lose patience. "There's no point going after dark. The pitch gets locked up in the evenings, and lessons start at 9. "Even if they started at 12, you'd have trouble getting Sirius up," Peter chimed in, sounding as if he was speaking through his mouthful, a common occurrence, and Sirius didn't feel he needed to open his eyes to verify. "We should all get time-turners," he muttered, yawning. "Students who need their beauty sleep should be issued with them." "What's a time-turner?" Remus asked. He was very close, his voice right next to Sirius's ear. "Turns back time, obviously." "They're illegal," James added quickly, "without ministry permission, and really, really dangerous." "I'm dangerous if I don't get enough sleep," Sirius grumbled. "Matron used to make us all get up at 6 on weekends," Remus mused, between bits of his breakfast. "She thought it was healthy or something. One of the older boys got into her room once and fiddled with her alarm clock, though, and we got away with an extra 2 hours in bed every day for a week before she noticed." "Muggles are ingenious," James chuckled. "But stay away from my alarm clock." Remus murmured, deep in thought. Sirius cracked an eye open to watch him, brow furrowed, lip poking out, a familiar expression. "Oh, we've lost him," Sirius said, smiling dryly. "Probably daydreaming about nogtails and nifflers again. I swear care of magical creatures is the only subject he cares about anymore." "Now leave Moony alone and eat your breakfast," James chastised. "I want you on the pitch in 5 minutes." "Fine," Sirius sighed, turning to look down at his plate. "Oi, where is my breakfast?" "Got to go," Remus said, standing abruptly. "Library, see you in potions." Sirius turned to accost him, but the shameless thief was already gone. Chapter 61. 4th Year, November, Part 1. "Oi, Black, ease up a bit." "Oh, piss off, Cardock. If you weren't falling asleep on your broom, then maybe—" "Sirius! Black!" James cut him off at the same time as Harpstreet Singh, Gryffindor's Quidditch captain, shouted his name, glaring furiously from his position in front of the goalposts. "What? If you can't dodge the bludgers on Sunday, how do you expect—" "That's enough!" Singh abandoned his spot by the rings to zip closer to Sirius, where he could glare more effectively. "I want you flying laps until you've calmed down enough to work as a team. You're not the only one on the field, Black. Unless you get that through your head, we haven't got a chance against Ravenclaw. Now go!" Sirius scowled, but he knew better than to argue with Singh when he started shouting. The older student was known for being even-tempered, a quiet, stocky young man whose presence often had a soothing effect on those around him. This normally lent itself quite well to captaining a Quidditch team full of rowdy Gryffindors, as Singh was uniquely equipped to rein in their nervous energy and fiery spirits. Unfortunately, Sirius Black was not just any Gryffindor. Even Harpreet had his hands full trying to manage the boys' mood swings in the week leading up to their first match of the season, and Sirius's first ever match on the team. To the dismay of his teammates, Sirius often channeled the nerves he felt into a sort of frantic energy that had him, for example, whacking bludgers at lightning speed with complete disregard for everyone else's position on the field. Sirius surrendered his beater's bat to Singh and made his way around the outer edge of the pitch, flying vigorously to try and work out some of the adrenaline that continued to buzz in his veins. He could feel his teammates' wariness as they watched him, wondering if he'd be ready for the match on Sunday, Their apprehension only added to his own anxiety about whether he'd muck everything up. The flush on his cheeks was part exertion and part embarrassment, as he cursed himself for his lack of precision due to nerves, and cursed Cardock for his sluggish flying during practices, without which Sirius's erratic aim might have gone unnoticed. By the time Singh called for a break, Sirius's hair was sweat-soaked and sticking to his forehead. He shoved it out of his eyes as he landed, breathing heavily and standing a little way from the rest of the team. James landed next to him, panting. "All right, mate." Sirius grunted, and James sighed. "Oh, come on, don't pout." Sirius grimaced. "I am not pouting," he grumbled, affronted. "R2, am not, R2, am not— Oi, quit it!" Now James was grinning, poking Sirius's side to punctuate each statement, and Sirius struggled desperately to wrangle down the laughter bubbling up in his throat. Not, get back here, Potter." James danced out of the way to avoid Sirius's attempted shove, laughed and shook his head, leading to a brief chase, followed by an even briefer wrestling match, which ended with Sirius sitting on James's chest as his friend futilely smacked at his legs and choked on laughter. I yield, he gasped. "Come on, I can't breathe." Sirius finally stood, helping the other boy to his feet with a smug smile. For a moment they grinned at each other, giggling, until their antics were interrupted by the unmistakable sound of Harpreet Singh clearing his throat. "All right, lads." They turned to find their scuffle had attracted the attention of the rest of the team, who were watching them with expressions ranging from Singh's amused smile to Marlene's weary eye-roll. The two of them jogged over to join their teammates, and James cast a meaningful look at Sirius as they reunited with the rest of the group. "Oi, Cardock." The chaser turned to look at him, wary. Sirius grinned. "Sorry for being a tosser." After a moment, the older boy smiled. "Just make sure you send those bludgers to the other team on Sunday, yeah?" Sirius rolled his eyes, laughing grudgingly. And all was forgiven. Singh looked relieved as he gestured for everyone to gather around so that he could discuss the flying formation he wanted to start with at the Ravenclaw match. The rest of the practice went much more smoothly, without any more wild bludgers or heated insults shooting back and forth across the Quidditch pitch. By the time they were landing and getting ready to head in, everyone was in high spirits. Sirius sauntered over to Marlene, flipping his hair around his face. "Nice flying today, McKinnon." "Oh, thanks, Sirius." "How about a kiss for good luck?" Her mouth fell open, face going bright red as she stammered. What?" Sirius waggled his eyebrows. "You know, a classic good luck snog, beta to Vita, in honour of our up-and-coming match." James, who was listening, began to guffaw, and Marlene frowned suspiciously. "Is this some sort of joke?" "McKinnon!" Sirius clutched his heart dramatically. "You wound me. I make my request with nothing but the purest of intentions, I assure you." Now James was doubled over, gasping for breath, which somewhat ruined the effect of Sirius's heartfelt plea. Marlene scowled, rolling her eyes. "You two are utterly impossible, I swear." She stomped off, still blushing, and Sirius frowned. "Trying to sabotage me, Potter?" James snorted. "Oh, please! I think you've got that covered all on your own, mate. Marlene McKinnon, seriously!" "Just wait, O ye of little faith," Sirius said, reaching over to ruffle his friend's wind-tousled hair. "She'll be succumbing to my irresistible charm before you know it." Sirius turned 15 on the Quidditch pitch, immersed in a sea of red and blue, listening to the chanting students. "Go, go, Gryffindor! Go, go!" He couldn't stop smiling as he walked onto the field with the rest of the team, basking in the glow of knowing that the entire school was riveted on him. Well, him and the rest of the players marching onto the pitch, but still. Why had he ever been nervous? This was the best feeling in the world. Sirius felt as though his blood turned to pure electricity, nothing but static and crackling lightning jumping in his veins, filling him with energy. He could hardly wait to take to the sky, and the second Madame Hooch blew her whistle, he was off, soaring at breakneck speed. The wind roared in his ears, cheering him on. The team fell immediately into the formation they had planned, Sirius and Marlene splitting off to cover different ends of the pitch. The bat felt like an extension of his own arm, eager for action. All the nerves that had coiled into his muscles were gone, replaced only with excitement and the thrill of finally getting to play in a real Quidditch match. Sirius knew Marlene's strategy. She often trailed players, protecting them from any oncoming bludgers. But he didn't have the same patience to follow others around, and together with Singh they'd honed in on a complementary strategy that was more his style. While McKinnon stuck closer to their vulnerable players, Sirius zipped across the pitch, chasing down bludgers before they could even strike, and knocking them as far away from the game as possible. "This is Black's first game, and he's obviously throwing himself into it," the commentator's voice echoed over the sounds of the crowd. "He's no doubt received plenty of coaching from Potter, who's just scored the first goal. That's Gryffindor in the lead with 10 points. Sirius grinned behind his helmet. "Yes, James." "As I was saying," the commentator, a 7th-year Hufflepuff, continued, "lots of talent on the Gryffindor side this year. Potter, of course, and McKinnon, who's one of the best beaters the Reds have had in years. And now Sirius Black, the black sheep of the bona fide Quidditch dynasty. You'll remember his cousin, Narcissa Black of Slytherin, one of the finest seekers Hogwarts has ever seen, and of course the younger Black brother, Regulus, who has taken Narcissa's place after a season as chaser." Now Sirius was scowling, excitement darkening with rage. Why was she talking about his family? It wasn't as if any of them were on the pitch. Narcissa wasn't even at Hogwarts anymore. Rumour has it that there's bad blood in the Black clan, so you can bet that the Gryffindor versus Slytherin match next term is going to be... "If you will focus on the game currently at progress, Miss Darcy," McGonagall snapped over the microphone. Sirius felt a surge of gratitude towards the grouchy professor, though the anger remained in his chest as the commentator apologised. "Sorry, Professor. So that's Dunelm of Ravenclaw, in position with the Quaffle. She shoots, oh, and that's a bad miss." Sirius continued to chase after bludgers, determined not to let his thoughts of his family distract him. He put everything else out of his mind, tuning out the commentary and focusing solely on the game in front of him. The lingering anger only strengthened him, adding a vicious twist of satisfaction to every bludger he was able to smack. And if he was picturing the faces of certain family members as he sung, well, no one had to know. In the end, it was a slaughter. The Gryffindor seeker caught the snitch, ending the match 300 to 100 in Gryffindor's favour. Sirius landed with the rest of his teammates, drinking in the cheers from the stands, dizzy with the heady taste of victory. He threw an arm around Marlene's shoulders, emboiled by the screaming crowd, and leaned in. She dodged him, turning so that the kiss landed on her cheek. But Sirius found that he was way too happy to care much either way. The common room was a crush of bodies that evening, vibrating with rock music and assaulting his eyes with red and gold at every turn. The entire house had showed up to celebrate a combination of the Gryffindor's victory and Sirius's birthday, which made him feel like a celebrity as he fielded both congratulations on his excellent Quidditch skills and well wishes for another year of life. The older students had brought along alcohol, and Sirius was offered a few surreptitious swigs from mysterious bottles and flasks. He sputtered at the burning sting down his throat, which made the older students laugh and slap his back with knowing smiles. James remained by his side for the entire night, laughing with him and accepting his own share of praise for his prowess on the Quidditch pitch. He kept trying to sneak glances at Lily, obviously hoping that she would come over to speak to him. But it was not to be. She remained off to the side, chatting with Mary and Remus, who had positioned himself by the stacks, and refused to move once the party started. Sirius smiled as he watched the tall boy licking crumbs from his fingers, then realised that he was staring when Mary gave him a funny look, and turned quickly away. His face felt hot, which he supposed was just from the crush of bodies surrounding him. After receiving a sufficient amount of praise, Sirius got around to opening his birthday presents: a broom repair kit from James, a ridiculous amount of chocolate from Peter, who probably expected him to share it, and no less than 3 brand new albums from Andromeda: Dark Side of the Moon, Country Life, which featured 2 scantily clad women on the cover, all the boys smirked at it as it was passed around, and Diamond Dogs. "Oh," Remus breathed, stroking the strange, unsettling artwork, reverently, unable to contain his excitement. "Put this one on first, please." Sirius grinned. "Anything for you, Moony." He settled the disc into place on the turntable. Sirius shivered as Bowie howled through the record player, the sound of a wolf. His stomach flipped as Remus's head shot up, their eyes locking. Sirius smiled at the shock in Lupin's features. listening as Bowie read in an eerie, slithering voice, reciting a poem as if casting a spell.
And in the death, as the last few corpses lay rotting on the slimy thoroughfare, the shutters lifted an inch in Temperance Building high on Poacher's Hill, and red mutant eyes gazed down on Hunger City.
The whole common room grew hushed, listening uncomfortably to the grim, ugly words. Nobody seemed quite sure where to look or how to respond as dogs whined and howled in the background. It was gritty and dark and strangely fascinating, Sirius thought, watching the entranced expression on Remus's face. The final lines were shouted definitely. But Peter understands that it's a whole month, Sirius whispered, voice rising slightly with irritation. The others were in bed. He and James were discussing their animagi plans once again. Apparently, Peter hadn't read the instructions as closely as they were supposed to, and had mixed some things up with the mandrake leaves. 30 days, yep, James assured him. If we do it over the summer. You forgot to cast your silencing spell, idiots, Remus called out. Bugger, Sirius swore, exchanging a panicked glare with James as he reached for the curtains. How much had Remus heard? It was well past midnight, and they had both assumed that Lupin was asleep. The party had been broken up ages ago by prefects, and all 4 marauders had climbed the stairs and gotten ready for bed, bidding each other good night. But apparently Sirius hadn't been as sneaky as he'd thought when climbing into James's bed, and Mooney hadn't been as exhausted as he made them think, even though he'd been yawning the whole way up the stairs. Remus poked his head out from behind his curtains, at the same time as Sirius, and they stared at each other from across the room. Sorry, Mooney, Sirius grinned, trying to play it cool. Did we wake you? Nah, Remus shrugged. I was thinking about this prank. Prank? James knocked into Sirius's shoulder as he shoved his head out. Who said prank? Remus smiled self-consciously, and Sirius felt a private wash of relief. He didn't seem to be suspicious of anything. James parted the curtains further, saying magnanimously, Please, Mr. Mooney, step into our office. Remus scrambled up immediately, eagerly padding over to join them on James's bed. He grinned as he settled down, bony knee knocking into Sirius's shin. Well, James prompted, holding his lit wand out to Remus like a microphone. Tell us. Just a second, Remus huffed, withdrawing his own wand. Muffliato. He's too clever for us, Sirius said dryly. Indeed, James nodded. Remus ignored them, rolling his eyes and tucking his wand away before turning back. Remember I was telling you about Matron's alarm clock? He asked, speaking softly. James and Sirius nodded, heads bobbing eagerly, urging him to continue. How we used to fiddle with it so that we didn't have to get up early anymore. More nodding. Well, I was thinking about how it could be applied at Hogwarts. I did some research, and did you know that the clocks in this school are controlled by one master clock? The big one outside the Great Hall. Oh, Mooney! Sirius cried dramatically, throwing himself at Remus so that both of them toppled backwards onto the bed and flinging his arms around the other boy's shoulders. Remus stiffened, trying to push him away, but Sirius gripped his pyjama shirt, pretending to cry tears of joy into his shoulder. You've read Hogwarts a History! One of you has finally read it! You're now my favourite marauder. Oh, get off, tosser, Remus growled. With his ear pressed against Mooney's chest, Sirius could feel the vibrations of his voice. He pulled back a bit in surprise, and Remus took the opportunity to shove him off, shuffling further back on the bed as James laughed at them. No one would ever guess you're the oldest black, James teased. Mooney, please continue. The big clock? Right, yeah. Remus straightened out his nightshirt, looking embarrassed by the attention. I had this idea, He blinked, clearly trying to regain his train of thought. The big clock that controls all the others, Sirius filled in helpfully. It's a spell that makes sure that every clock and watch in the castle is perfectly synchronized. Even the ones we bring from home reset, even Muggle clocks. It's a bloody good bit of magic. Yeah, Remus nodded, settling down. Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking, if that clock goes wrong or gets moved by 5 minutes, then so do all the others. And it would affect lesson times and meals and, well, pretty much the whole running of the castle. And if we started off really slowly, say, moving it forward by 5 minutes a night, no one would notice for ages, would they? I mean, how could anyone notice if all the clocks are the same? He finished his explanation, sitting back and turning to look at James. The dark-haired boy pushed the glasses up his nose, frowning as he processed the plan. Sirius bounced slightly on his knees, grinning and hardly able to contain his excitement. Once Remus turned to him, he burst out, "Oh, Mooney's done it again!" Chapter 62. 4th Year, November, Part 2. Monday, the 4th of November, 1974. "I dunno," Peter wrung his hands, fretting. "Professor McGonagall says we shouldn't mess about with time." "We won't be," Sirius groaned, losing patience. They had already explained the plan twice, and still Pete couldn't seem to grasp it. "This is a muggle prank, Peter. Get it through your thick skull." "Don't," Remus chided, frowning. This only served to irritate Sirius further, and he seethed as Remus turned back to Peter. "We're not messing about with time, Pete," he explained patiently. "We're just messing about with clocks." Peter blinked up at him, then turned to James for confirmation. Sirius rolled his eyes. "Okay," he said slowly. I think I get it." They'd agreed to begin as soon as possible, and sitting through lessons was torture when all Sirius wanted to do was get started on the prank. It had been ages since they'd done a mission with all 4 of them, and he was reprimanded more than once throughout the day for failing to keep quiet, both by professors and by Remus. "It won't work if everyone else knows about it," Lupin hissed at lunch when Mary leaned over to ask what they were whispering about. "So shut up. I know you lot can keep a secret if you really try." Sirius frowned, but he did as he was told, not wanting to disappoint Mooney. Once night fell, they crowded around James's invisibility cloak, eager to sneak out of bounds altogether once more. There was, however, one minor issue. It was considerably more difficult to fit all 4 of them under the cloak than it had been 3 years ago. "Peter, you stay here," Sirius ordered, after the 3rd attempt that resulted in Remus elbowing James in the chest. "Why me?" Peter whined. "I'm always the one that gets left out." "We're not leaving you out, idiot. It's purely a logistical concern," Sirius huffed, rolling his eyes. "James!" "I'll stay," Remus offered. "I'm the tallest, it's my fault." "But it was your idea," Sirius pointed out, shooting Peter a dirty look. "You can't miss out." Remus shrugged. "There'll be lots of times. We're doing it more than once." "Even with 3 it's a squeeze," James said thoughtfully. "Black, Pettigrew, sit this one out." "Why me?" Sirius and Peter both cried at the same time. "Because," James said with a sly smile, "it's Mooney's idea, and my cloak." After another round of protests and assurances from James and Remus that they would take it in turns every night, just to be fair, the 2 rejected marauders finally conceded. They watched their friends huddle together and disappear under the cloak, only knowing they'd left once the door to their room shut and opened seemingly on its own. Sirius turned to look at Peter, who was pouting, and scoffed, moving to sit down on his bed. "What?" Sirius rolled his eyes, remaining silent. "What?" "Oh, quit whining, will you? I didn't even say anything." Peter huffed, growing red in the face. "You don't have to be so rude," he muttered resentfully, sitting down on his own bed. "Maybe I'd be less rude if you stopped whining about everything." "I wasn't whining." "Yes, you were. I had just as much right to go with as you. You don't even understand what we're doing." "Yes, I do." "Oh, really?" "Explain it to me, then. Go on." Sirius waited, arms folded, one eyebrow expectantly raised. Peter flushed. When he remained silent, Sirius shook his head. "Right. That's what I thought." Peter glared at him, lip trembling as if he was going to cry, or shout, or some combination of the 2. But instead he just said, quietly, "You can be really mean, Black. You know that. It's never to James, or Remus. It's only to me." "Oh, shove off, Peter. It's not my fault you're such a girl." For a moment, Pete looked like he might respond, but then he just yanked the curtains shut around him. And a moment later, there was a strange, flat noiselessness that indicated a silencing spell. Sirius flopped back onto his mattress, trying to ignore the twist of guilt in the back of his throat. Peter was being too sensitive. It was just a plain fact that he didn't understand the prank the way the rest of them did. If he couldn't handle lagging behind the other marauders, then he should learn to keep up. But it wasn't like it was Sirius's responsibility to coddle him. Besides, he had good reason to be annoyed with Peter. Somehow all the girls in their year, and quite a few other years to boot, had found out about the great snogging race, which ruined the challenge of the entire thing. There was no one who would have any motivation to blab about it except Peter, since he was the most likely to lose. And even though Sirius was certain he'd done it, he still hadn't confessed, which meant that he thought they were too stupid to figure it out. So really, Peter was the one who had started it, and it wasn't Sirius's fault at all. By the time James and Remus returned, Sirius had taken to pacing the floor, impatient and irritable. The curtains around Peter's bed were still drawn. He had been silent the entire time, which Sirius thought was stupid. If you're upset with someone, you should have a proper fight, not go off and sulk about it. But that was the problem with Peter. He never confronted his issues head on. So how could Sirius ever be expected to work out his feelings with him? "Well," he barked eagerly as James and Remus threw off the cloak. "Done," James declared, yawning as he headed off to bed. He patted Sirius's shoulder as he walked by, smiling dryly. "Enjoy your 5-minute lie-in." And so the prank continued. Every night that week 2 marauders would get cozy under the invisibility cloak, tiptoeing downstairs under the cover of night to perform the spell that moved the minute hand back by 5 degrees, until, on Sunday morning, every clock at Hogwarts was running 25 minutes late. So far no one had suspected a thing. Everything was going according to plan. There, however, was one issue with this plan. "The thing is," Sirius said, yawning over his breakfast, "we're not actually getting an extra half an hour of sleep, are we? We're not going to bed any earlier." "No, well, that wasn't actually the intention," Remus murmured, distracted by his attempts to build a sandwich that appeared to be 20% toast and 80% jam. "Still, I think we should be getting something out of it." "The satisfaction of a job well done," Remus suggested dryly before chomping down on his monstrosity. Globs of jelly oozed between the crusts, smearing across his fingers and making Sirius cringe. While basking in their own genius was all well and good, Sirius would have preferred to bask in it while he wasn't half asleep. That night, when he and James snuck down to the clock, he convinced the other boy that they should nudge it forward just a tiny bit more. Sirius was very rudely awoken the next morning by a pair of firm hands shaking his shoulders rapidly from side to side. He half whined, half groaned, flustered out of sleep. "What did you do last night?" Remus demanded, a note of panic in his voice. "You and James did the clock, didn't you?" "Fancied a bit more of a lie-in, that's all." "How much did you move it by?" "Well, I dunno, hour or 2. "What?" "What?" Sirius stared up at Remus, trying to understand what the problem was. "Isn't that the whole point of the prank?" "Well," Remus paused, seeming unsure of how to argue. He frowned, then huffed. "Still too much. I'm going to go see if I can turn it forward a bit tonight." Sirius shrugged, shaking him off and returning to the bliss of uninterrupted sleep. Remus's panic had been for nothing. There were a few stray comments about how strange it was to wake up in the broad daylight during winter at 7 o'clock in the morning, but no one seemed to really suspect anything. It was a Sunday anyway, and everyone was too busy lazing about the castle to give it much thought. That evening Sirius bid adieu to Remus and Peter as they crept away under the invisibility cloak. "He's just going to try and correct it, you know," James said from where he'd been polishing his broom on his bed. "I know," Sirius grinned, flopping down next to him. "Just means we can turn it back further on our next run." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Remus will have a fit." "But he'll be so well rested while doing it." By the time the other marauders returned, Sirius had successfully won James over as an accomplice to his scheme. After all, what fun was a prank if they didn't see any results? Remus might have the patience for month-long master plans, but Sirius's style was much less subtle, carpe diem and all that. To his delight, they finally began to see the fruits of their labour the following week. In potions, the marauders arrived to find Slughorn scratching his head, puzzling over the students' most recent projects, all of which had been completely ruined. "Oh dear," the professor fretted, utterly confused by the useless, grinding potions that everyone had produced. "Did everyone leave them to brew for the correct amount of time?" It must be precisely 24 hours. Of course, everyone insisted that they had, or at least they thought they had. Only the marauders knew the truth, and Sirius had to fight the delighted smile that wanted to creep across his face as he turned to look innocently puzzled. The incident was wildly amusing, and only bolstered Sirius's certainty that their prank would be much more fun if they broke away from Remus's 5-minute increment regimen. Remus disagreed, but Sirius would not be thwarted. He always made sure that he went down to the clock with either James or Peter, and when it was Lupin's turn to go, he took a step back. "I know what you're doing," Remus scowled when they woke up one morning with the sun already at his highest point in the sky. "And I know what you're doing," Sirius shot back, grinning. Goody two-shoes. Their prank had turned into a deliciously confusing game of tug-of-war, and Remus was going down every other night and trying desperately to fix the damage Sirius had caused. This only gave Sirius more license to run amok, and by the 3rd week of November the clocks were swinging back and forth so wildly that neither of them could keep track. Sirius refused to tell Remus how far he'd moved the clocks forward by, so that Remus had to guess at his corrections, which only made the game more fun. Until, that is, Remus over-corrected, leaving them all with only 4 hours of sleep. "What the hell is going on?" Mary demanded on one such morning at breakfast, looking very frazzled by the array of food before them. Breakfast had become an unexpected casualty of their prank. It seemed that the house elves in the kitchens were suffering greatly from the confusion about the time of day, leading to disagreements about what meals should be served. As such, the students could now find scrambled eggs alongside mashed potatoes and gravy, legs of lamb sitting next to cornflakes, and a handful of times they'd arrived for dinner and found nothing had appeared at all. Sirius usually found it hilarious. Besides, who could complain about a bit more variety when choosing at meals? This morning, though, he was too tired to be amused. All his energy was focused on levelling Remus with a death glare. The tug-of-war was all well and good, but not when Mooney took things too far in the opposite direction. It was James who responded to Mary's question, asking nonchalantly, "What do you mean?" "Isn't anyone else sleeping really badly?" Mary asked, sounding a bit desperate for any sort of confirmation. She looked just as rumpled as the other students. Her round eyes were bloodshot, and her braids were unravelling into thick corkscrews. "And what's up with the weather?" "Yeah, it was really dark yesterday," Marlene said around a yawn. "But today it started getting light at 6 or something." "Hogwarts is a very mysterious and magical place," James said. Who were we to question its inner workings? Sirius might have laughed at that, but he was far too busy trying not to fall asleep in his bowl of cereal. He resolved to move the clock back by at least 2 hours that night, just to show Remus that he was fighting a futile battle. When he opened his eyes, Lupin was giving him an irritated look, as if he knew exactly what Sirius was thinking. He tried to glare back, but found that he was smiling instead. Wednesday, the 27th of November, 1974. By the 4th week, not even Sirius knew what time it was meant to be anymore, nor did any of the other marauders. Remus had finally admitted defeat, though it had taken Sirius a few days to realise it. He'd moved the clock back quite a bit before realising Remus was no longer trying to correct it. Things finally came to a head when, while everybody was trying not to fall asleep in transfiguration, Peter suddenly looked out the window and gasped. "What is it, Pettigrew?" McGonagall snapped irritably. Everyone in the castle had had much shorter tempers than usual, which, while amusing at times, had made classes a bit more of a minefield. Nothing, Professor," Peter said quickly, looking down at his feet. But it was too late. The entire class, McGonagall included, had turned to stare out of the window, where they had the opportunity to watch a lovely sunrise at 11 o'clock in the morning. "Oh, for goodness sake," McGonagall fumed. "Class, I want you all in the Great Hall at once. I'm getting the headmaster." Within the hour, the marauders were part of the sea of students chattering nervously in the Great Hall as they waited for Dumbledore to address them. The head teacher had been conspicuously absent most of their meals that year, which McGonagall insisted he was away because of business for the ministry, but Sirius suspected it had something to do with the war. Still, he had made time to speak to the students now, and Sirius's stomach was a knot of nerves as he wondered whether they'd been found out. "What's going on, do you think?" Lily leaned over to ask Remus, voice hushed, as the white-haired professor approached the lectern. No idea, Remus replied, sounding a bit strangled. It seems, Dumbledore spoke, drawing the attention of the room, that we have some pranksters in our midst. Immediately, everybody in the room turned to look at Sirius, James, Remus, and Peter. Sirius sat up straighter, smirking and preening under the attention. James smiled affably, the picture of innocence. Remus ignored the staring completely, and Peter began bouncing his leg anxiously, sweating slightly under the pressure of all those eyes. But Dumbledore made no accusations, only smiled pleasantly, and continued, "Rest assured that the clocks are now being corrected, and measures taken to ensure that they cannot happen again. In the meantime, I think we could all do with a bit of rest. I am cancelling the rest of today's classes, to be resumed on our usual and correct time tomorrow morning." Throughout the hall, students murmured appreciatively at this news. "Yes!" Sirius hissed, vindicated. "Results!" "Now," Dumbledore lifted his arm, gesturing. "Off you go. Use this time wisely." The hall broke out into chatter as students got to their feet and began to make their way towards the doors. The marauders were just about to follow when McGonagall appeared behind them, reaching out to grip both Sirius's and James's shoulders. "Wait," she said. "Not you four." Sirius swallowed nervously, heart kicking as the rest of the student body bled out of the hall. It cleared quickly, leaving the four of them alone with Dumbledore and McGonagall. "So," the headmaster smiled, blue eyes twinkling. "Which one of you came up with the idea, eh? Or was it a collective effort?" The marauders exchanged glances, then resolutely stared down at their laps. Dumbledore chuckled. "Admirable," he nodded, a note of approval in his voice. "Then we shall treat you all equally, I think 10 points each from Gryffindor. Do you agree, Professor McGonagall?" "At the very least," she harumphed, sounding much less calm than the older man. "And detentions." "I shall leave that in your capable hands, then. Just one thing, boys." They all looked up, bracing themselves for a telling off, but Dumbledore continued to smile. "You are clearly all very gifted wizards," he said, sounding almost amused, and Peter made an odd, disbelieving noise in the back of his throat. "That much is clear. It was a simple spell, yes, but highly effective. That kind of thing will take you far. But perhaps a little more forethought and planning next time. You might not have been discovered quite so quickly." Sirius couldn't resist protesting at that. Without thinking, he blurted out, 3 weeks isn't bad." James kicked him, but the damage had already been done. Although Dumbledore laughed, McGonagall did not look amused. She eyed them furiously, replying, "Then it shall be 3 weeks' detention, Mr. Black." Sirius hung his head, cursing his big mouth, and James muttered under his breath, "Idiot!